While the economic boom fueled by international trade came to define economic and societal developments, in many countries across Asia in the second half of the 20th century, the demographic changes taking place will come to define much of the economic and social developments during this century. Today, economies across the region face very different demographic challenges. Some of them are in the middle of an aging crisis that directly affects their society as well as national economic and political power. Other countries with a much younger and growing population are grappling with the challenge of creating jobs and making sure that the structure of their economies develops soundly. In this video, we explore some of the demographic changes that are taking place in Asia. We discuss how populations in many of the economies throughout the region are changing, the effects of these changes, what the future may look like, and possible ways to alter some of the trajectories observers are foreseeing. After World War II, the Malthusian fear was present in Asia. People worried that a rapidly expanding population would result in famine, a dramatic shortage of resources, and a stagnation in socioeconomic development. The worry about the Malthusian trap even resulted in the world's most populous nations adopting different policies to control demographic change. In India, the Gandhi regime instituted a compulsory sterilization program during a period of emergency. The program actually received foreign funding and was encouraged by the World Bank and others. In 1976 alone, over 6 million Indian men were forced to sterilize in the program. While that program was later shelved, family planning efforts have continued in India, with efforts focusing more on women. In a study, it was found that 37% of women aged between 15 and 49 were sterilized, and that about 4.5 million women are sterilized each year. In China, the famous or rather infamous one-child policy was implemented nationwide in 1980. The purpose of the policy was to limit a great majority of families in China to having only one child. In 2015, the Chinese government announced that the program was to end in 2016. The one-child policy was to have dramatic long-term consequences that have come to characterize socioeconomic development today. Looking at demographics today, the overall continent of Asia had a population of about 4.75 billion as of 2022. That accounts for about 60% of the total population in the world. Those numbers also include Central and West Asia. In this video, we focus on the Indo-Pacific region. While demographic features of countries such as China, India, and Japan get quite a lot of media coverage, the region consists of a large number of countries with very different demographic setting. Dividing them into groups with similar features make it easier to understand the similarities and differences in terms of demographics. 3 groups of countries with similar features stand out. In the first group, there are the Northeast Asian economies of China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The People's Republic of China claims Taiwan is one of its provinces. Most countries agree with the so-called One China policy, which is the diplomatic acknowledgement of China's position that there is only one Chinese government. In this video, we do not elaborate on this issue, but simply instead view Taiwan as a separate economic entity for the sake of our brief discussion, as its economic and demographic development differs significantly from that of the People's Republic of China. These 4 economies have developed differently over time. Japan experienced an extended period of rapid economic growth from the end of World War II to the end of the Cold War. The economies of South Korea and Taiwan started growing rapidly in the 1960s and became part of what is commonly called the Asian miracle. China's economy, on the other hand, took off much later as the country began to reform and open its economy at the end of the 1970s. However, while these countries are at different stages in terms of economic development, they are converging when it comes to their demographic structures. Most notably, all of them exhibit a demographic pattern that is characterized by rapid aging societies. All 4 of them had a relatively low median age in 1990, ranging from 23.7% in China to 36.9% in Japan. In 2020, China had a median age of 37.4%, and Japan's median age was 48%. Both South Korea and Taiwan follow the same pattern. A forecast published by the UN suggests that all 4 will have a median age above 50 as early as 2050. For China, this is particularly challenging as its population may grow old before it becomes rich. Looking at forecasts for China's demographic development, the now so populous nation is seemingly destined to have lost a significant share of its population by the end of this century. A second group is comprised of more mature economies and older populations. Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand all exhibit low birth rates and aging demographic profiles. However, they do not face the same immediate challenge of a shrinking workforce as in several of the Northeast Asian countries, as they have long had policies in place for large-scale immigration. A third group of countries is projected to grow and age much slower than the Northeast Asian countries. Several often regarded as middle power states, these countries are poised to benefit from the so-called demographic dividend that the Northeast Asian countries have all experienced. Examples of these countries include India, today already the world's most populous country with over 1.4 billion people, Indonesia, a country with a young population of over 270 million people, and the Philippines with an even younger population of over 110 million people. Besides these three groups, there are countries that have relatively stable populations. One example of such a country is Vietnam, which is experiencing rapid economic growth. However, it is still experiencing population shifts, with fast urbanization acting as a driver of the country's export-driven economic growth spurt. India, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam all had a very low median age in 1990, ranging from 18.4% to 20.7%. In 2020, their median age was still low, although Vietnam had reached a somewhat higher 31.6%. The UN report forecasts that all of them except Vietnam will still have a median age below 40% in 2050. The fertility rate clearly shows the divergence between these groups. In 1990, the fertility rate measured as live births per woman in the population was 2.51 in China, only to come down to an extreme low of 1.28 in 2020. China's fertility rate is forecasted to stay well below 2 in the coming decades. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan all exhibited very low fertility rates as early as the 1990s. Like China, forecasts indicate that they are expected to stay very low moving forward. For China, this means that the country's population recently peaked and that it will start to decrease quite rapidly. The UN report gives three possible future scenarios. In a very low scenario, the decrease in China's population in the coming decades is dramatic, ending up below 500 million people at the turn of the century. For the countries that are now set up to reap the rewards of the demographic dividend, the fertility rates were much higher in 1990. While they dropped quite significantly over the following 3 decades, they were still above or close to 2. While the fertility rate is expected to continue to fall in the coming decades, the drop is not as dramatic as for their Northeast Asian neighbors. Is the future bleak, and what can be done? The view on demographics has changed over time. While the argument that the world is becoming too populous is still used in some instances, perhaps especially by people arguing for humans' negative impact on resources, the environment and climate, observers are increasingly noting the challenges societies that are aging quickly face. In some cases, the negative view on aging societies in many countries can be somewhat extreme. In popular and social media, it has, for example, become common to argue that China is facing an impending doom due to its population aging at such a rapid pace, especially as its people have yet to reach a sufficient income level. One such example is the geopolitical expert Peter Zeihan, who argues that China's population is quickly collapsing and that the only thing that could save the country at this point would be massive political or economic change, not the kind of change that China has in store. More generally, the argument when it comes to China is that the population is becoming old before it can become rich. This, combined with a lack of a proper pension system and existing limitations in the country's healthcare system, will put increasing pressure on citizens and society at large in the coming decades. While it is understandable that many observers view the rapidly aging populations in Northeast Asia with skepticism, others believe that these aging societies do not have to result in an economic death spiral. Proponents of a more positive view bring forward potential remedies for a quickly declining population. First, there is the obvious solution of promoting immigration at scale. Many Western countries do this. As we noted earlier, some of the economically more developed countries in the Indo-Pacific, such as Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand, do the same. However, the countries in Northeast Asia have a very different view of immigration throughout history. Japan, Korea, and China all have very low levels of immigration, and it would take a radical societal change for them to change course on immigration. Second, policies aimed at boosting labor force participation rates, especially for older segments of the population and women, can have positive effects on the economies and enable more sustainable conditions in society. Third, it is possible to continue increasing productivity. To increase productivity means to make it possible for more output to be produced with the same amounts of inputs or for the same amount of output to be produced with less inputs. Innovation and technological development make this possible. Examples of productivity growth-inducing technologies that can help make life in aging societies more sustainable include automation and artificial intelligence. The economies in Northeast Asia can also continue developing their economic linkages with the economies in South and Southeast Asia, as they are currently facing opportunities to expand their economies due to their relatively young population and low labor costs. For the countries that are characterized by a young population, the challenges are different. Key areas that policymakers in countries such as India and Indonesia will have to focus on include improvements in education and public health care. Education is instrumental in making sure that skilled labor is matched well with job opportunities in these economies. Healthcare is important to ensure that the young population is healthy and can contribute positively to society. Problems such as maternal mortality, child stunting, and poor nutrition must be combated. It is also important to improve healthcare as these countries need to face the reality that even though they have a young population today, their populations will grow older in the coming decades, and it will be significantly easier for society to cope with this shift if older citizens can remain active and healthy for longer. To sum up, the demographic profiles of the countries in Asia are diverse, and each country is facing its own set of challenges and opportunities. While some commentators are pushing a doom and gloom narrative for several of the countries in the region, the future does not necessarily have to be a bleak one. However, ignoring the demographic changes that have taken place in Northeast Asia and the potential advantage of the demographic dividend that is currently apparent in many countries in South and Southeast Asia would be very unfortunate. The divergent demographic profiles combined with the diversity in economic development across the region means that it is very likely that we will see the economies in Northeast Asia becoming increasingly interlinked with the still growing states in South and Southeast Asia. We hope you have enjoyed this look at the different demographic contexts throughout Asia. If you have, and if you want to see more related content, please do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel. If there are topics that you want us to cover in future videos, do not hesitate to leave a comment below. We look forward to seeing you again soon.